Beneath the stone threshold of a house in ancient Nineveh, excavators found something that had no business being there. Not rubble, not debris, something placed. Something arranged with a deliberateness that made the archaeologists stop and reach for their notebooks before they reached for their brushes. Clay figures. Buried precisely where the ritual texts said they should be. Not scattered by time, not displaced by collapse, but positioned. Exactly positioned, as if the act of placement was itself the point. And this is where the investigation begins. Not with what was buried, but with the question. Underneath that question, what were they so afraid of that they worked in secret, in darkness, beneath the very threshold of their own home? Because this was not improvised. A clay tablet, designated Asur 13955, written by an apprentice exorcist named Kishir Ashur, prescribed the ceremony in precise terms. The anointing with fine oil, the libations of beer. The animal sacrifices required to awaken whatever spirit the Mesopotamians believed lived inside the clay.
Wait, an apprentice exorcist? Writing a precise technical ceremony? That sounds less like ritual and more like a manual.
Exactly, because it was. A manual for a threat they considered real enough to document in detail. The cuneiform inscriptions carved into each figure's back were not decorative. To the Mesopotamian mind, a name was not a label. It was a functional blueprint. The inscription did not describe the object's purpose. It activated it. So the ritual was real. The location was precise. The threat, whatever it was considered specific enough to require a specific countermeasure placed at a specific point. The doorway, which forces us to ask, what were the 5 figures and what names had been carved into their backs? 5 names. Carved into the backs of clay figures, buried beneath the exact point where a human being crossed from inside to outside. Not near the threshold, not beside it, directly underneath it. The spatial precision alone tells us something. Whoever placed them there had a specific theory about where the boundary was most vulnerable. They weren't guessing. And the names themselves. Read them in sequence and something becomes clear. The first, identification of the enemy. The second, vocalization of the alarm. The third, physical capture. The fourth, expulsion. The fifth, and this is where it gets strange, a direct imperative, not a title, not a description, an order. Don't think, bite. Every other name on those figures is descriptive. A functional label. But that last one is different in its grammatical structure. It was written as a command, issued to the figure. Not a name given to it. Someone was speaking to it.
Someone was speaking to a clay figure buried under a doorway and giving it orders?
Not metaphorically, grammatically. The structure of the inscription is imperative, a direct command. Written in the same form used to address a living soldier. This is where we leave solid ground and enter the realm of theory, but the theory is compelling. What creature fits this sequence? Identification, alarm, capture, expulsion, and the capacity to act without hesitation. What creature was already doing all 5 of these things instinctively at the precise location the protocol demanded? The answer closes one question, and immediately forces open another. If the dog was chosen as guardian against invisible threats, Osisayo, why did the same ancient world also make it the supreme symbol of healing? The same creature, the same animal that the Mesopotamians placed at the threshold to repel what could not be seen, they also placed at the bedside of the sick and the dying. That is not a minor detail. That is a contradiction that demands an explanation. At Isin, the city of Gula, archaeologists found more than 40 dogs buried beneath the ramp of her temple, not discarded, not disposed of, interred with the same deliberate care given to high-status human burials. These were not strays. They were participants in something the temple considered essential. And the medical records of the Asu, the Mesopotamian physician, contain an observation that should stop you cold. They recorded that wounds licked by dogs healed faster. This is not theology. This is empirical observation, written down 4,000 years before modern microbiology could begin to explain why.
Hold on. Wounds healed faster from a dog's lick? 4,000 years ago, they were documenting that as medicine?
As empirical fact. Recorded, repeated, verified across multiple case observations. The theology came later. The observation came first. So here is the tension the evidence creates. One explanation says the dog's dual role required no deeper logic. It was simply the most ubiquitous animal in human life, available as a symbol for any boundary function. A convenient vessel. But another explanation suggests something more unsettling. That the Mesopotamians identified a genuine functional unity, that guarding the perimeter and accelerating healing are not opposites. They are the same capability, expressed in different directions. The guardian and the healer were never two things. Which forces the question that this chapter cannot answer, and the next one cannot avoid. If the dog could perceive threats that no human sense detected, and accelerate healing that no human hand could explain, what else could it read that we still cannot? The Shuma Alu is not a book of prayers. It is not mythology. It is a catalogue, systematic, methodical, written in the dry language of observation, recording anomalies in the natural world and their predictive significance. Weather patterns, astronomical events, and dog behavior. The scribes placed them in the same category, not because they were superstitious, but because they were empirical. They were building a predictive model from observable data. And the dog's behavior was included because it was demonstrably reliable as a warning signal. One tablet, BM 3TC165, records something that should stop us cold, not a single dog's alarm, a collective one. One dog's warning answered by others across the settlement. The scribes did not describe this as chaos. They described it as a coordinated network response, a system functioning exactly as designed. This is where the evidence gets uncomfortable. Because the specific behaviors catalogued in these omen series, circling before lying down, positioning between sleeper and door, barking at the perimeter in the deep night, these are not trained responses. Modern animal behaviorists document the exact same behaviors as crossbreed, species-wide tendencies, instinctive, universal.
Instinctive and universal, meaning Mesopotamian scribes and modern behaviorists catalog the exact same behaviors independently, 3,000 years apart?
3,000 years apart, no shared source, identical record. The theological framework is ancient. The observation underneath it is not. Two entirely separate systems of inquiry, separated by 3,000 years and no shared language, arrived at the same record. Which forces a question neither can answer alone. If the scribes were accurate observers and the behaviors they catalogued are real, what exactly were the dogs responding to? And then came the night when no amount of perception could hold the line, not against a demon, against an army. 612 BCE, The most powerful empire the ancient world had yet produced, gone, not weakened, not diminished, erased. When Nimrud fell, the palace threshold fell with it. And the bronze dogs, the guardians, placed at the gates of kings, did not hold the line. They were thrown into a well, not discarded carelessly, thrown deliberately alongside the royal ivories. That detail matters. The looters treated the bronze dogs as objects of equivalent value to the finest treasures in the palace. Whether that value was monetary or magical, we cannot say with certainty. But one theory refuses to stay quiet, that throwing the guardian figures into the well was not looting. It was a counter-ritual, a deliberate act of neutralization. If this is true, it forces us to ask something uncomfortable. Did the people who sacked Nimrud believe on some level that the bronze dogs still held power? That the threshold still needed to be broken?
An invading army stopped to perform a counter-ritual against bronze statues because they were afraid of them?
Afraid enough to act, deliberately, methodically, before they took anything else. And then there is the other evidence. The clay dogs, buried deep beneath the doorways of private homes, were never found by the looters. Too deep, too ordinary, too embedded in the fabric of domestic life to be visible as power. The guardian at the imperial threshold fell with the empire. The guardian at the household threshold survived in the dark beneath the floor. The bronze dogs went into the well. The clay dogs endured, and the living dog, the Kalam, outlasted all of them. Tonight, it is still at its post. And tonight, when the light goes out, where will your dog be? And has it ever been wrong about what it was watching? The demons cannot be verified. That is the honest place to stand. The clay tablets are physical, historical fact, sitting behind glass in museums today. What we cannot test is the theology. What we cannot measure are the invisible entities the Mesopotamians believed were crawling across their threshold. We cannot confirm their fears, but here is what we can verify. The behavior. Modern animal behaviorists have documented something that no training manual explains. Across every breed, across every continent, the dog positions itself between the sleeping human and the door, not because it was taught, not because of pack hierarchy alone. It is species-wide, a crossbreed tendency so consistent that researchers have stopped calling it learned behavior. One explanation says this is simply wolf social architecture, inherited and redirected, the subordinate guardian protecting the pack. Clean, sufficient. Evolutionary biology closes the file. But then there is the convergence: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece. 3 civilizations with no shared source text, each placing the dog at the same location. The threshold, the boundary, the passage between states. Not similar locations, the same location. Independent observation producing identical conclusions.
3 civilizations. No contact, no shared texts. And all 3 arrived at the exact same conclusion, about the exact same location?
Independently, simultaneously, without a common source. That is not cultural diffusion, that is convergent observation. And the final line, preserved across multiple forms, multiple cultures, always a variation of the same statement. The scribe at Isin wrote it most plainly. They were not given the duties, they asked for them. The threat cannot be verified, the behavior can. Whatever your dog is doing at your door tonight, it has been doing it for 4,000 years. The only question that remains, the one neither the scribe nor the scientist has answered, What exactly is it watching?